name's Britt Isenberg. I'm the Leadership Program Director for the Gettysburg Foundation. It is my distinct honor to be here with former Chief of Interpretation at Gettysburg National Military Park, also spent some years at Antietam, and has written the Bible on the Maryland campaign. It's amazing. But Scott Hartwig. We're here to continue our series, Faces on the Front Lines. And today, we've got one of my personal favorite stories to share with you about what the human experience is like, especially for these civilians who find themselves in the way of these two armies as they head north towards Pennsylvania. So we're not at Gettysburg yet, but we're getting closer. Scott, could you tell us a little bit about what some of the civilians here in south central Pennsylvania are doing as these armies move northward?
Well, everybody is up in arms and frightened, and whenever people are like that, there is a range of reactions and emotions. From, if you're an African American and you're living in the Gettysburg area, you are going to clear out. Because the Confederate Army they consider any black people that they encounter in Pennsylvania to be potentially runaway slaves. So they're going to re-enslave that person. So they're getting out of the way. A lot of them are fleeing to the other side of the Susquehanna River. The white people have various reactions. I mean, a lot of people are going to stay and try to protect their property. One of the things I found is that frequently the men left with the horses, which tells us what was the most valuable thing they had in their household, and they left their women and children at the farm or in the house. And
slightly different perspective than what we would say 2024. Yeah, sorry.
Right.
Yeah.
But what that tells me is that they, for all their fear of the Confederates, what they didn't fear is that the Confederates were going to commit rape or come into their homes and ransack their homes or burn their homes, that the Confederates would actually be fairly well behaved. But of course, it's always a risk, but people are doing all sorts of things, including with some people, they're enlisting in the Pennsylvania emergency militia that has been raised for this crisis. Because the Confederates, when we're in June, by the third week in June, the Confederates are in Pennsylvania. They're off to the west of us in the Cumberland Valley, up around Chambersburg. They're moving north towards Carlisle and Harrisburg. And on June 26th, they're approaching Gettysburg. So even before they're approaching Gettysburg, there's opportunities if you're a young man in the Gettysburg area and you want to try and help defend your home to enlist. So you could have enlisted in the 26th Pennsylvania Emergency Regiment, which was an infantry unit. And the thing to keep in mind about these units is that they have literally no training. I mean, they muster them together. They might have trained a little bit before the whole unit was mustered, but they don't have much experience. But they also have an independent cavalry regiment, or not a cavalry regiment, a cavalry company, commanded by a captain named Bell. And that company is going to eventually, later in that summer, become Company B of the 21st Pennsylvania Cavalry. So a lot of times...
I have to stop you and say huzzah on that note. Anyway, yes, go ahead.
Anyway, you know, there's a monument on the battlefield about the 21st, but they're not the 21st at the time of the days right before the Battle of Gettysburg. They're an independent cavalry company, only about 50 men. Many of the men don't have uniforms. I'm not even sure where they got their weapons from. They may have had to supply their own weapons and supply their own horses. So they're not, and they're also untrained. It's another important element here. So one of the people who enlists in this is a fellow named George Washington Sandoe. And Sandoe's 20 years old at the time of his enlistment, which is on June 23rd, 1863. So if you know your Gettysburg story, you know that the Battle of Gettysburg begins on July the 1st, 1863. So this is 8 days before the Battle of Gettysburg begins. He enlists in the Army. So you can imagine, he doesn't have any training, right? So
it's an interesting kind of juxtaposition too, you know, talking about those civilians who flee and, you know, there might be men taking their horses with them. Here we have a story of men who are bringing their horses to the army in the moment to defend their homes and livelihood. So,
well, it says a lot about Sandoe's character, and we don't we don't know why he enlisted.
Yeah.
He didn't write down, and nobody who knew him wrote down and said this is why George Sandoe enlisted. But you have to presume he's 20 years old. He was married 4 months before this, and his wife is now pregnant. So if you're a 20-year-old, your wife's pregnant, now you might go, oh, I'm staying at my house and protecting my house, but I think in Sandoe's case, he's like, I have to do something to protect my community and my family as well, and that means enlisting in a military unit. So he takes a big risk in doing that, although, you know, we can remember when we were 20 years old, many, many moons ago.
Yeah. Risk-reward balance is slightly different, right?
Yeah. So you sometimes the danger is abstract to you until it becomes real. So that may have been the case with Sandoe. We don't know. What we do know also, when I looked at the 1860 census, I mean, just 3 years before this, 1860, he's a 17-year-old. He's the oldest child at his family home. He does farm work. His mother's in her 30s. I think she was 36 years old. His father had died in 1859, and he has a younger brother and sister. So a pretty normal life, I think, for a rural Pennsylvania young man is George Sandoe's life. So he enlists in this independent cavalry unit, and 3 days later, after he's enlisted, there are reports that the Confederates are marching towards Gettysburg from the west, from Chambersburg. So they mobilize the 26th Emergency Militia and this independent cavalry company, Bell's company, and they march them out the Chambersburg Turnpike, which runs west of Gettysburg, and they're going to march out to Marsh Creek. And for those who are really familiar with the battle, where they're going to go to is where the first shots of the battle are fired between Buford's cavalry and Heath's division.
So wait a second here. Now, first shots, what's your take on this, Scott? Because we know this is a big deal for Gettysburg buffs. Who fired the first shot? Who's the first casualty? But you're telling me June 26th is when the battle begins? Those are the first shots? How are we going to frame this?
No, it's not when the battle begins.
Okay, good.
It's a. This is a.
We can continue.
This is this is a Gettysburg campaign skirmish that's going to occur. So they go out, they take up this position behind Marsh Creek. They actually did not initially anticipate any sort of action. So it was raining a little bit, kind of misty. So the infantrymen set up their shelter tents to get out of the rain. And they did send some people to the other side of the creek, some of the cavalrymen, some of the infantrymen, as scouts and pickets to provide an early warning. And pretty soon they got the warning. I think it was late in the afternoon that the Confederates were approaching. And it was Confederate cavalrymen who were attached to the division of Jubal Early. Now, Early is a veteran commander in Robert E. Lee's Army of Northern Virginia. He has about 6,000 men in his division. He has two cavalry units attached to him, the 17th Virginia Cavalry and the 35th Virginia Cavalry Battalion, which is, you know, not one of the elite Confederate units. They use these men a lot of times as scouts. And they maybe were a little bit more lean towards the irregular, even though they weren't in a regular unit, but they leaned in that direction. So they are preceding the Confederate infantry, and there's only one Confederate infantry brigade that is behind them. That's John Gordon's brigade. The rest of the Confederate division is north of the Chambersburg Pike, because Early is approaching from two directions to try to come in on the flank of anybody who might be at Marsh Creek. That just is another sign of he's a veteran commander. He knows what to anticipate. And the whole thing ends up being a debacle for the Union forces. They're poorly trained. They have no chance of stopping these Confederates, and pretty soon the infantry and some of Bell's cavalry take off to the north towards the Mummersburg Road to get away, and Bell's cavalry company, minus the guys who go with the 26th, stampede back towards Gettysburg. They ride into town, and the Confederates are going to pursue them, of the 35th Virginia Cavalry Battalion. When they come into town, they go out the Hanover Road and they get to Rock Creek, and then Captain Bell gives an order which is indicative of the fact that they're not yet a military unit. He says, every man for themselves, go home.
Yeah.
You know, go back to your house. So George Washington Sandoe and another fellow that he knew, Nathaniel Leitner, are going to leave at that point, and they leave the Hanover Road and they start to follow Rock Creek, which meanders its way south, just kind of southwest of Gettysburg. So they're following Rock Creek to get home, to come down here. This is Mount Joy Township in Adams County, Pennsylvania. So they're coming down in this direction. And if you follow Marsh Creek all the way, just a little ways to the north of us, it crosses over the Tawnytown Road, which is not very far away from where we're standing right now. And they have no problem. They ride down along the creek until they get to the Baltimore Turnpike. When they reach the Baltimore Turnpike, they encounter a group of Confederates. We don't know how many men were in the party of the 35th Virginia Cavalry. These men were probably either scouts or pickets, because the Baltimore Pike is a turnpike. It's a macadamized road, so it's an all-purpose road. It's an important road. It's a likely way the enemy might approach you. So this is a standard procedure for the Confederates, is to patrol these roads to make sure there's no surprises, and just to, you know, find out what's out there. And these two groups, Sandoe and Leitner, and these Confederates kind of run into each other, and we don't know exactly what happens. Did they order Sandoe and Leitner to halt? Were Sandoe and Leitner wearing uniforms? Were they not wearing uniforms? The one thing they did have that probably was a giveaway was guns. You know, farmers aren't generally riding around with pistols, and you know, I don't know if they had a carbine, either of these guys, but the Confederates maybe ordered them to halt. We don't know exactly what happened. Leitner urges his horse to jump the fence, and he jumps the fence into the Baltimore Pike and bolts down the Baltimore Pike to get away from these guys. And Sandoe tries to do that, but his horse won't jump the fence, so he pulls his pistol out, fires at the Confederates, and then one of these Confederates, I think using a carbine or a pistol, but I don't know which it was, shoots Sandoe in the head and in the breast and kills him instantly. Sandoe falls out of the saddle into the road. The Confederates go over, take his horse, and leave his body there. So pretty hard-bitten sort of guys who've seen some service, and then head on into town. So Sandoe is, you could say he's the first Union soldier killed around Gettysburg in the Gettysburg campaign. He's not the first soldier killed in the battle, because the battle hasn't started yet, but he's the first soldier killed in the campaign around Gettysburg. And it's just a very tragic story. I mean, it's just incredibly bad luck that he runs into these guys when he does. It's bad luck his horse won't jump the fence, because maybe he would have got away. It's bad luck when he fired. He was probably scared and nervous. He missed, because if he'd hit, he might have gotten away. So
I think, as you mentioned, we were talking before, you know, a couple minutes one way or the other, and the encounter maybe never happens, too, you know. Which, that is why we're here at the Mount Joy Lutheran Church. Of course, this is where Sandoe will end up being interred at the end of all this. Do you want to share anything about the process of getting him down here, or?
Yeah, there was a fellow named McAllister, I believe, who found his body.
Staunch abolitionist, I believe, too, right?
Yes.
McAllister,
yeah. And he, I'm not sure he knew who he was when he found the body. He put the body in his wagon and drove it into Gettysburg, and then he was identified. And then they brought the body out, I think, to his wife, and his mother probably came over. I'm sure that was a really heart-rending moment. Because, you know, another thing to think about in these stories is that today, with film and the internet and YouTube and all these things, we have a lot of opportunities to imagine what it's like for somebody who has a parent or a husband or a son in the military, and they find out they've been killed. And you know, when I was back in the 2000s, my oldest son, Jason, was in the 4th Infantry Division. He was in Iraq and he was in Afghanistan. He made it through both of them fine. He was in a combat unit as well. But I have a little sense of what some people could feel. And it's intense.
Yeah.
There's nothing like it. You never get over it. And I can imagine it devastated his wife.
Sure.
I always remember a story of Dorsey Pender, who was a Confederate division commander in the Battle of Gettysburg, and he wrote to his wife faithfully throughout the war. In fact, his letters to his wife were published in a book called The General to His Lady. But he gets mortally wounded at Gettysburg, and when his wife found out he died, she locked herself in her room. This is how the story goes. And when she came out, her hair was gray. She never remarried. It changed her entire life. So these events like this, we come to the cemetery and it seems neat and orderly and everything like that. But there's a story to tell of George Sandoe and his family and his wife, and the son that Sandoe will never meet, who will be born afterwards.
Yeah, the story of those that have to continue on, right?
Right.
And move into the future. And that's what's pretty cool about all this. So thank you very much, Scott, because we get to be a part of this Gettysburg story. You all get to be a part of the Gettysburg story. And we can't say thank you enough for that. Scott, it's been an honor to spend some time out here with you. It always is. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Great, Britt.
And we'll do this again sometime soon, all right?
Yeah,
but to all of you, we're not done yet. Of course, the battle has not even begun. We're just on our way towards the 3 days of July 1863. So please stay tuned and catch the next video. Thank you very much.